To learn more about the Pima Library Foundation or to make a donation to help support our mission, I encourage you to visit our website, which is www.thepimalibraryfoundation.org. Now it is my pleasure to introduce my fellow board member, Helene Woodhams, who has the privilege of introducing our presenters. So, Helene.
Thank you, Jason. I'm a retired Pima County Public Librarian, and I organize the salons for the foundation. Now, foundation salons traditionally feature authors whose books have appeared in Pima County Public Library's signature literature review, Southwest Books of the Year. But today we're departing from that tradition to present an author whose forthcoming book tells such a compelling Southwest story and local and dear to our hearts that we decided not to wait for it to arrive in print. So today, Wynne Brown is going to give us a sneak peek at her latest offering, The Forgotten Botanist, Sara Plummer Lemmon's Life in Science and Art, which will be available from the University of Nebraska Press this autumn. Based on Sara Lemmon's lively correspondence and her exquisite artwork, The Forgotten Botanist blends science, history, and biography to present a unique perspective of a courageous pioneer and determined scientist with a thirst for knowledge. Sara Lemmon's story, says Wynne, is one of tenacity and grit, of Western exploration, pioneer women, Apache warfare, the Civil War, and some romance. Wynne Brown is no stranger to the Southwest literary scene. By profession, she is a freelance writer, editor, and graphic designer, and has authored or contributed to several books, including More Than Petticoats, Remarkable Arizona Women, The Falcon Guide to Trail Riding in Arizona, and the award-winning Cave Creek Canyon, Revealing the Heart of Arizona's Chiricahua Mountains. Her work has appeared in numerous national and regional periodicals, including Popular Science and Arizona Highways. Now, Wynne's fascination with the life of Sara Plummer Lemmon translated into more than 7 years of research. And during that time, she made several engrossing and sometimes heartbreaking discoveries. She'll discuss her research journey and the life of Mount Lemmon's namesake with Ellen McMahon. Now, Ellen is a professor in the School of Art and Associate Dean for Research in the Arts at the College of Fine Arts at the University of Arizona. And we're especially pleased to have Ellen join the conversation today because, like Sara Lemmon, Ellen's work as a visual artist, designer, and writer has focused on the place where art and science intersect in the natural world. In 2007, she received a Fulbright Scholars Grant to work with the Center for the Study of Deserts and Oceans in Puerto Penasco. And she's also co-author of Groundwater, The Art, Design, and Science of a Dry River. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So thank you both, Ellen and Wynne, for joining us today. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Helene, and thank you everybody for inviting me. I'm super happy to be here, and I'll be the moderator. Wynne will talk about Sara and her book for about a half hour or so, and then I'll be fielding your questions for a Q&A after that. I have to slip out right before 5 because I'm teaching my art design and environment class tonight to my grad students. Jason will take over as moderator then, so don't be alarmed if I disappear. It's not a technical problem that time, although it was earlier, but it will be a scheduling conflict problem. Okay, thank you and welcome. Take it away, Wynne.
All right, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen, I hope. Let's see, except that it says host disabled participant screen sharing. So let's see, maybe that could be changed so that I can share my screen. Let's see if that, okay, now that works better. And let's see, I'm going to share. Don't you love technology? All right, so what I'm hoping is that you all can now see my screen and you see the cover of my PowerPoint. Is that true? Let's see. Okay, yay, hooray. All right. So thank you, Jason, Helene, and Ellen. I am so grateful to the Pima Library Foundation for setting up today's event. And I'm really grateful to all of you. There's so many of you for taking the time out of your day to be here. You know, Sara was both a librarian and she was a fierce reader, so I think she'd be grateful as well. My usual presentations about Sara are about an hour long, but I want to leave today lots of time for our conversation and for your questions. So this will be kind of an abbreviated distillation to show you why it is that I chose to write a biography about this remarkable woman. So as Helene mentioned, I'm a writer, editor, and graphic designer. These are just a few of the books and other projects that I've either written, edited, illustrated, designed, or managed. My background is a mix of journalism, biology, and scientific illustration. And some of my training was right here at the University of Arizona back in the 1970s in Donald Sayner's much loved scientific illustration program, which Ellen also went through. But, you know, really, I think of myself primarily as a storyteller. And to me, stories are the connective tissue that can attach us to our land or to our forebears or even to our entire culture. And so obviously one of my favorite stories is about Sara Lemmon. And you can see more about that on the research tab of my website. And that research tab will take you to the project newsletter, which is the best way to get updates, such as when the book will be available to pre-order. And the most recent issue was about today's presentation. Each newsletter has snippets about Sara. It's free. I only send it out if I have something to announce. And I'm happy to say that unlike most of the emails that we're all drowning in these days, I do not ask for money. So this is when I get to clear up some confusion, and I get to tell you that some of you have acquired a collector's item. The Pima Library Foundation very kindly sent out bookmarks for this event with the working title of the book that I provided. And of course, after the bookmark went to the printer, my editor at the University of Nebraska Press, who is absolutely wonderful, hi Bridget, came up with a new title and one that I really, really love. So Like Death to be Idle is no longer the title, and instead the book now is The Forgotten Botanist, Sara Plummer Lemmon's Life in Science and Art. COVID willing, it'll be out this fall as an affordable paperback with 50 images, and I'm thrilled that those images will be in full color. And to say that I'm just thrilled about this whole book is a massive understatement. So today, first I'm going to tell you a little bit about the backstory behind the book, because sometimes I think the story behind a book is almost as intriguing as the book itself. Then I'll zip through a quick bare bones timeline of Sara's packed life. We'll look at a few examples that have survived of her really exquisite artwork. And then we'll shift the conversation with Ellen so that you all can have a chance to ask your questions. So when I started all this, I really had no idea what I was getting myself into. About 10 years ago, I first learned that Arizona's Mount Lemmon is named for a woman botanist way back in the 1800s. Later, I read that the University of California and Jepson Herbaria archives in Berkeley had 10 linear feet of material on the lemons. And my first thought was, wow, somebody should do a book. Well, I now know that there lie monsters in those words. So talk about a gift to historians. Sara was very close to her family. She wrote home every week, mostly to her father and to her sister, Maddie. I made 3 trips to Berkeley archives and I photographed all 1,200 pages of Sara's letters. I then moved them to my hard drive and I read them all, which was sometimes challenging. As you can see from this slide, Sara was a frugal type, and to save paper, she often wrote across her own handwriting. And if she wrote on both sides of the paper and the paper was transparent, they became rather challenging to read. So this next slide gets us a little deeper into the Plummer family history. You already know about Sara's sister, Maddie. And Maddie had a daughter, Sara's niece, who was confusingly also named Maddie. Maddie Jr. had a son, Harold St. John, Sara's great grandnephew. Harold grew up to be a noted botanist in Hawaii. He had 2 boxes of Sara's paintings stored at his house. And when he died, his granddaughter, Amy St. John, donated those boxes to the archives at Berkeley. And here they are. Tragically, these 2 boxes hold all that's been found so far of Sara's artwork. Because of both their age and Hawaii's humidity, they are much too fragile to exhibit or even to handle, as you'll see in just a little bit. So as many of you know, these days you can publish a book independently or you can go the traditional publishing route. I'm a huge fan of independent publishing, as quite a few of you on this call know, it's how I make my living. But in this case, I felt that a traditional press was really the best strategy for this particular book. Because it's nonfiction, I first wrote a book proposal, which is almost as much work as writing a manuscript, because my proposal is 100 pages. Over a 2-year period, I submitted it to 24 different agents, commercial publishers, and academic presses. And I'm happy to say that in October 2019, I signed a contract with the University of Nebraska Press. And I'm especially pleased that this book will be a Bison book, which is UNP's trade imprint for general interest readers. The next part was writing the actual book. And as you can tell, I have excellent office help. The manuscript is now with the UNP copy editor. And in the meantime, I'm already working with the publicity manager to line up blurbs and reviews. And the design department has also asked me for suggestions on the cover. Since I'm also a book designer, I'm going to be very curious to see what they come up with. And I have faith that they're going to come up with something really marvelous. And I'll share that cover reveal in the newsletter. So enough about the bookmaking process. Let's move on to the story of Sara Allen Plummer Lemmon, for whom Tucson's very own Mount Lemmon is named. She was born in New Gloucester, Maine on September 3rd, 1836. So her biography will be published sometime very close to her 185th birthday. She was the middle child of 5. You already know about her younger sister, Maddie, and she also had 2 older brothers and a younger one. Here's a picture of Maddie in her older years and father, whose name was Micah Sawyer Plummer. In all those 1,200 pages of letters, there's only one from Sara to her mother, whose name was Betsy Haskell Plummer. And all I know about that is that Betsy had some significant health problems. At the age of 20, Sara left home to attend the Ladies Collegiate Institute in Worcester, Mass., where she earned a certificate in teaching calisthenics, and that's what we now know as gym class. The irony about her teaching gym is that her own health had always been fragile, and we'll see more about that. In 1861, Sara moved to Brooklyn, New York. She graduated from the Greenleaf Female Institute with honors, doubly certified in chemistry and physics. Then a year later, she was accepted to the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Science and Art. There, she studied chemistry and physics at night, and then during the day, she taught, again, calisthenics or gym, and she also tutored people in art. Interestingly, in a sort of interesting bit of foreshadowing, she spent 3 years volunteering at New York City's Bellevue Hospital as a nurse for wounded Civil War soldiers. And that's where it's quite possible that she crossed paths for the first time with Clara Barton. And of course, years later, Clara Barton would establish the American Red Cross. Again, the fact that she worked in a hospital is incredibly ironic given her own health. She had terrible respiratory problems. She was constantly coming down with bronchitis, constant colds. And in 1863, on top of everything else, she caught measles and nearly died. In 1870, she nearly died again, this time of pneumonia, and she finally realized that really her whole life depended on escaping the bitter northeastern winters. So she made the gigantic decision to move across the country all by herself to California, where she didn't know a soul. And this was really not an easy jaunt. The railroad had been established, but it wasn't very reliable. So she chose to go the long way around, the really long way around by steamship. She finally disembarked in San Francisco, where she stayed for a month, and then she realized that her lungs still weren't up to the cold and damp. So she headed south to Santa Barbara. And when she got there in 1870, the population was 2,970 people, a little different than what it is now. This picture is taken 5 years after she moved. Santa Barbara was lovely, the climate idyllic compared to Manhattan, certainly, but the intellectual stimulation was a far cry from New York City's. And this is when she wrote to Maddie, "It's like death to me to be idle." Worse yet, and this group will certainly understand, there was no library. So she rounded up donations and hundreds of books, and she established Santa Barbara's first library. And I love this picture. This photo is a lesson and no book is ever really finished. I only just received this photograph from the Santa Barbara Public Library archives a couple of weeks ago. As she recovered her health, she took long walks along the beach and the hills above Santa Barbara. Sara was insatiably curious. She taught herself botany by using her artistic ability, and this earliest surviving painting is most likely some kind of flowering fruit tree, maybe an apple tree. And you can see all these brown spots on it. Those are called foxing, and they're possibly fungus damage from the humidity. She still missed the stimulation of New York City, so she also set up a lecture series, a Salon, which may be what brought this man to Santa Barbara. And this is John Gill Lemmon. He usually went by J.G. Lemmon, and he was born in Michigan in 1832, 4 years before Sara. He became a teacher and then the county superintendent of schools. He had started attending classes at the University of Michigan, and then the Civil War began, and he enlisted in the Union Army in June 1862. He was in 32 battles in between working as an Army nurse, and then he was captured in August of 1864. He was later sent to the infamous Andersonville Prison. The photo on the left is J.G. Lemmon, but the one on the right is not. But it's typical of what the few survivors of Andersonville Prison looked like. J.G. was released in 1866, and he wrote later that after, quote, a year of liberal diet, unquote, his weight had increased to 90 pounds. And this was a man who was about 6 feet tall. So he moved to Northern California because he was going to convalesce at his brother's home in Sierra Valley. He had always been interested in botany, and he started gradually learning the Western plants. The ones he didn't know, he sent to Harvard University's Dr. Asa Gray, the preeminent American botanist. And this illustration that you're looking at is one of Sara's paintings that she did some years later. It helps to have a little bit of context of what was going on in botany at the time. And I actually call this slide my bounty of mostly bearded botanists slide. And this was a time of frenetic botanic activity in the 1870s and early 1880s. All these men were in frequent communication with one another. And by this time, Sara Plummer had educated herself to become a knowledgeable amateur botanist. So she was in touch with all of these people as well, and as was J.G. And later on, they often socialized with John Muir, and Charles Parry was among their closest friends. So in 1876, J.G. showed up in Santa Barbara, most likely at a lecture hosted at Sara's library. And it was 2 years after this picture was taken. It seems to me he's no slouch in the whiskers department either. Like Sara, he too had terrible health issues, but his were because of his POW experiences. The two of them started botanizing together, presumably with a chaperone, in the hills above Santa Barbara. And J.G. became smitten with Sara to the point where he asked Asa Gray to name this particular plant for her. And to this day, it's still called Plummer's Baccharis. A year later, J.G. proposed to Sara, but she turned him down. And she said that she loved him deeply, but she felt that they were both too sick, too often to marry, and that two such unhealthy people should never marry one another. So then instead he accepted that, and they remained affectionate pen pals for the next several years. Then Sara got sick yet again, this time with spinal meningitis in 1880. She nearly died, and apparently that changed her mind because they were married on Thanksgiving Day, 1880, or as Sara described it to Maddie, they, quote, plunged into the matrimonial vortex. I love that. She was 44, he was 48. She relocated from Santa Barbara to Oakland and moved in with JG and his mother, who's kind of a story of her own. They resolved at Sara's suggestion that, as JG wrote later, instead of, quote, idling our time in useless saunterings and listening to silly gossip, unquote, they would delay their whole honeymoon until the growing season. And at that time, they would, quote, make a grand botanical raid into Arizona and try to touch the heart of Santa Catalina. So in April 1881, they arrived in Tucson by train, and they set up camp in the foothills north of Fort Lowell. And at that point, Fort Lowell was indeed a fort, not a city park as it is now. They spent 2 weeks struggling to get to the top of the range from the south side, the side that I can actually see out my window, and they failed 3 times. They finally gave up, they went back to town, and they got in touch with Emerson Oliver Stratton, who owned land, the Pandora Ranch, on the north side of the Santa Catalinas. Stratton had never been to the top, but he knew how to get there, and even better, he had pack animals. So they arrived at the top of the 9,157-foot peak. And Emerson later wrote, quote, we went to the highest peak of the Santa Catalinas and christened it Mount Lemmon in honor of Mrs. Lemmon, who was the first white woman up there. So in 2019, which seems like a really long time ago now, Dave and I hiked their route from Summer Haven to Oracle. We went downhill. And it was a very long day, and we decided at that point that the Lemmons are way tougher than we are. Tragically, most of that route shown in the red dotted line here burned in the last summer's Bighorn fire, which makes us very glad that we did it when we did. The following year, the Lemmons returned to Arizona, this time to Fort Huachuca here at the bottom, near the Mexican border, where they spent several months. They loved the area, and they were right near the fort. They were near what's now called Gardner Canyon. At that point, it was called Tanner's Canyon, and they called it a botanical paradise. Most of the surviving artwork that Sara did came from this trip and this place. So they camped the entire time, and she wrote to her family saying, what you can read there on the screen, and added, I wish you could see our rough outfit of 2 gray rubber blankets, old flannel vests and drawers, old boots and hats, a big lunch basket filled with corned beef, crackers, cheese, 3 or 4 jars of nice currant jelly brought in by good, thoughtful friends. The whole outfit and occasion brimful of interest and enthusiasm, if you will allow the expression. I love that she cares about food. So here's a couple of the plants that are still named for her. Many, many plants in the Southwest carry the name lemon, but it's worth remembering that Asa Gray made it very clear that any plant with the name lemon was in honor of both Sara and JG, not just JG. But this particular one is Plummer's Fern, honoring her maiden name. And again, it was the first one, was collected in the Chiricahuas in the fall of 1881. This one is a Morning Glory, the first specimen collected by Sara Plummer Lemmon in 1882. And this is a Stevia, which is the same group of plants that you use to sweeten your tea. And this was collected in the Huachuca Mountains in 1882. In 1884, they went to New Orleans because Sara had been put in charge of organizing the Pacific Slope section of what had the very long title of the World's Industrial and Cotton Centennial Exposition, otherwise known as the World's Fair. They spent 6 months there, and they spent most of their spare time hanging out with Clara Barton and her field agent, Dr. Julian Hubble. Here's another highlight in the lives of the supposedly frail, delicate couple. Astoundingly, they decided to become homesteaders. Thanks to the wonders of the internet, I was able to locate a map of their actual claim, and Dave and I traveled there in 2019. And in a really remarkable stroke of good luck and timing, I refer to those events as Serendipity, we were able to walk the land with the ranch manager. That dead walnut that's right there in the center of your screen is next to the spring that Sara mentions in one of her letters. They first set up camp in a canvas tent, but the second day they were there, they'd gone off to collect firewood from a nearby woods, and somebody set fire to their tent and burned everything they had. Undaunted, they ordered wood from San Luis Obispo, and they built a 10 by 12 cabin by hand. Sara wrote her family about the fire on some paper that had somehow survived the fire, and she included, as you can see, a sketch of the cabin that they were building. From then on, generally they were out in the field somewhere in the West during the growing season collecting plants. Then they would spend every winter at their herbarium in Oakland, eking out a living by selling specimens and seeds to collectors. They also produced several books, all illustrated by Sara, and did frequent botany lectures. And here's a picture of the Lemmon Herbarium. This makes me feel much, much better about the state of my desk. Sara was also very active in the Red Cross. She wrote the history of the Pacific Slope Red Cross. That was no small accomplishment. I have a copy of it, and it's 486 pages with hundreds of photographs. So that was quite a project. And I also discovered during the process of doing this book that she quietly established the first training school for nurses on the West Coast. I discovered it by reading an old issue of a nursing magazine, and she never mentioned it in any of her letters. She was very modest. She was also a frequent speaker about the importance of forest conservation, and she also spoke often at women's suffrage events. Her most well-known accomplishment was in 1903, after a 10-year battle, when the golden poppy was named California's state flower. In June of 1905, the Lemmons returned to Tucson, and they hunted up Emerson Stratton, and the following month, the three of them retraced their steps on 5 burros in honor of J.G. and Sara's 25th wedding anniversary. It's hard to read the writing there on that postcard, but she wrote, "Both of us are well and happy on this, our silver wedding journey. We sleep in the open air beside a delicious mountain stream that sings our nightly lullaby." And at that point, she was 70 and he was 74. So the question is, by now, Sara had made hundreds and hundreds of paintings, and where are they? So I'm afraid I might have an answer to that question. Sara was the second female member of the, until then, all-male California Academy of Sciences. She then became the first woman who was allowed to speak to that group. After breaking through that barrier, she was at the Academy Herbarium often, working on plants and identifying them. In her letters, both she and JG often referred to sending their specimens to the California Academy of Sciences, as well as many of her illustrations. And as many of you know, at 5:12 a.m., April 18th, the San Francisco earthquake convulsed the Bay Area and beyond. And as if the earthquake wasn't bad enough, fires broke out all over the city, including at the California Academy of Sciences, which was gutted. 100,000 specimens were lost in the fire, and I believe that a lot of Sara's work probably went up in flames. I would love to be proven wrong. So she wrote her family, "We are safe, though tremendously shaken." And let me turn my phone off. Although she wrote her family, "We're safe, though tremendously shaken. Both Sara and John were shattered by the loss of so much of their work. JG's health, which was already fragile, continued to decline over the next year, and he even lost much of his vision. He then died of pneumonia in November 1908, 2 days before their 28th wedding anniversary." After John died, JG died, Sara never really recovered. And in fact, Maddie believed that Sara's decline began with the trauma of the earthquake itself. Sara was committed to Stockton State Hospital, which was basically an insane asylum, on April 2nd, 1916. Ironically, the date that would eventually be called Earth Day. The diagnosis was dementia. I find this just tragic because she became profane, and this very distinguished, elegant, brilliant, talented woman had to be prevented from leaving her house unclad, as the local newspaper said. So she died on January 15th, 1923, and they are buried together under a gravestone that reads, Partners in Botany, in the Mountain View Cemetery in Oakland, California. I had wanted to get back to Oakland to photograph it, but wasn't able to get there. So Sara's great-great-grandniece, Amy St. John, was kind enough to go and take the photo, and she sent it to me yesterday. I'm very appreciative. So what about Sara's artistic legacy? Some are in the books that they produced together. And interesting, this one is copyrighted in Sara's name. This one is a black and white photograph of a painting that Sara did. You can actually see her signature there from one of JG's books about the pines. And I mentioned earlier that the boxes of her paintings that had been stored in Hawaii, and that some of the artwork is just too fragile to handle. And you can see that that would certainly be the case of this one. Sometimes the problem goes well beyond foxing. But fortunately, some of them are much less damaged. This is a nettle spurge, again, it's a watercolor on paper like all of her work. And while visiting the Nebraska State Museum, we were able to see the actual specimen that Sara collected in the Huachuca Mountains. And here it is. Thank you, Thomas, who's on this call, I believe. With a label in Sara's distinctive handwriting. Notice that Sara is simply identified as "and wife" down here. I'll spare you the feminist rant, except to say that several authorities believe that it was actually Sara who did much of the botanical work credited to JG because he was so devastated and damaged by his war wounds. Here's another one of her paintings that was somehow spared from the fungus and the insect damage, and it's a gentian. Again, it's signed at the lower right here. And another one, I keep thinking each one of these is my favorite every time I see them, and then I look at the next one and I say, no, that's my favorite. So she signed it here, and I love that this one was done on July 4th, 1882, again at Fort Huachuca Canyon. And this one of a thistle. So why should we even care about this fascinating woman, especially now at a time of such tremendous upheaval? And to me, it's because she's perched at the intersection of so many stories. The stories of art and science. Her art is both accurate and exquisite, and I would actually list her among the early women proto-ecologists. Her story is also one of women's history. In addition, she wrote about several of the indigenous tribes. In addition, her writing, her letters are a window into military history because they often stayed at the military forts for safety. And of course, she shared her daily life with a living remnant of the Civil War. So it's another picture of that. And in Arizona, we have her legacy of a mountain and numerous plants throughout the Southwest that are named for her. But last but not least, to me, this is a wonderfully romantic story. I mean, these are two amazingly fragile and determined individuals who are really just not cut out for traipsing around the wilderness, but they love botany and each other very deeply. So in conclusion, I hope you agree with me that Sara is indeed another hidden figure of both science and art, and she deserves to have a mountain in her name and a book. So thank you again for being here. Thank you, Pima Library Foundation, for inviting me. And do email me if you'd like to sign up for the newsletter so that you'll know the moment the book is available. And at this point, I'm going to see if I can stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Ellen to take any questions. And I think that worked. Did that work?
Yes,
Yes.
worked for me. I don't see any questions yet. But I have so many questions. I was lucky enough to read a lot of the manuscript, and it's amazing to the detail about Tucson at that time, and their treks up to Mount Lemmon are just incredible. Just to have that insight into the sort of the history of this area in particular. I have a couple of things I'd like you to talk more about. One is the well, first of all, I think the amazing thing about Sara Lemmon reading the book right now is their perseverance and the kind of obstacles that they faced, both the physical health obstacles and I don't know, the social and cultural obstacles of that time, just in light of the pandemic, and how our frailty is being so, foregrounded by that disease that we're all being affected by in different ways. So I just reading about their grit. I mean, it's like the pure grit of what they did, considering their illness. They're both of their frailty, like you said. But I noticed in the manuscript there were several mentions of nervous exhaustion of Sara's husband, and I was wondering, medically, what do you think that is now? What would that be called now?
I think it must be pretty clear that he had post-traumatic stress disorder. His experiences both on the battlefield, you can imagine being in 32 different battles, but then he was not only in Andersonville prison, he was also in the Florence prison. And there are extensive writings from him about his experiences and the starvation and the maggots. And he was, I think, really severely traumatized by that experience. And everybody who knew him would write about how he was very nervous, he was easily distracted, he had a very hard time focusing. And many times he would miss out on trips because he'd say, I'm just too sick, I'm too weak, I can't do it. And yet he would go off on these expeditions to Mount Graham or up the Chiricahuas, and he'd be there climbing trees and whacking off great chunks of branches and bark in order to send boxes and boxes to Asa Gray. And to me, it's astonishing the way both of them were able to transcend their terrible health and accomplish so much. And, I'll have times where I'll feel like not doing what it is I'm supposed to do. And I'll think about Sara. I carry Sara around in my head. My husband says he feels as if he'd married two women. And, maybe we've all gotten soft. I don't know.
Well, it is a good testament to this idea of passion. Like they were just like, they were able to overcome everything with their botanical passion. Okay, you've got all kinds of fabulous questions in here. So I guess I'll start from the top. How were you able to get photographs of the fragile artwork?
The archives at Berkeley, the University of California and Jepson Herbaria have been very, very kind and wonderful to work with. And I was able to see the artwork because the work is so fragile that the archivists didn't even want to handle the work because they were afraid that if they took them out of the box, they would just crumble into nothing. And they felt that they needed to be handled by an art conservationist. So I found an art conservationist in Berkeley, and her name is Susan Filter, and contacted her. And with the help of donations, some from people who were on this call, I was able to pay her for an entire day to work in the archives. And she and Dave and I went through the 2 boxes. There are 276 pieces of art, and very carefully, and lifting each one out and photographing each one. And that's where those pictures came from. It was an astounding day. I just felt so honored to actually be touching these paintings, that some of which had not been touched except maybe by Harold for 100 years. It's amazing.
They are exquisite paintings. I'm surprised she didn't become famous as a botanical illustrator, just as that, because her accomplishments there are amazing. So you have some questions about naming. One is, will the book have an appendix of plants named in her honor and a timeline of her collecting travels? And then another question related, is Plummer Street named after her in Tucson?
Plummer Street, I don't believe is named after her. I believe that that's somebody else because it has just one M. And in terms of the timeline, that kind of goes back to the timeline of how did I keep track of when was she where, and when did she write which letter. And I don't know if you're going to be able to see it or not. But I have what I refer to as the project brain. And it's let's see, I think my virtual background.
In your background.
Oh, can you, I don't even know if you can see it or not.
No, it's disappearing in the
Oh, it's disappearing. Fine. Okay, well, we won't worry about that. But what I did is I created a table in Word, and it's 43 pages, 9-point, and listing each letter and where they were at each point. And then I used that to build the book. So the book is in chronological order. There's not a specific timeline of where they were when, but there is a list of the plants that are named for her in it.
That's
great. Did I answer the question? I think I did.
Yeah, you did. And then a related question, is there a plaque or an information board on Mount Lemmon that highlights?
There is a plaque. Yes, there is a plaque. And it's up at Summerhaven. And Summerhaven has asked me to come do a presentation there, and it would be, there's various possibilities of where the book launch might be. That's been one possibility. We haven't quite gotten there yet because of the pandemic.
So yeah, there's a question about talking about your dramatic, well, let me just ask another question about Sara, her ill health. Do you think that her dementia was related to her lifetime of ill health?
That's interesting. I don't have the medical knowledge to know whether there's any kind of connection between people who have Alzheimer's and earlier things. I really don't know, but that's an interesting question. I suspect that a lot of the dementia was triggered by the trauma of the earthquake.
Yeah. There's a question about spectacular events during the entire project. For example, how do you top the RV disaster?
Oh, I hope not to top the RV disaster. For those who don't know, we were on our way to Berkeley to rephotograph the artwork, and I was driving and flipped our truck and RV. And wear your seatbelts. Always, always wear your seatbelts. The state trooper told us that 97% of people who are in rollovers walk away if they wore their seatbelt. that if you don't wear your seatbelt, it doesn't go well. But yes, that was spectacular is one word for it. The thing that's been really marvelous about this project is the way I've been able to travel and follow her footsteps, going to Nebraska in order to see the specimen of the nettle spurge, being able to go to Shalom, California. I mean, who ever even heard of Shalom, California, other than the fact that it's where James Dean died? But to be able to walk on the very land where they built their cabin, and there's nothing left. I was hoping to find a spoon that, might have, I don't know, her initials or, a pencil or something. And there's nothing left.
So you have a question that's kind of related to that. What personal connections have you been able to make with Sara and John's family members? Are they supportive of your work? And is yours the only significant work on his lives?
John has been written about quite a lot because he was a very well-known botanist. And there's a book that just came out. I won't try to hold it up since I've learned my lesson about holding things up in front of my virtual background, but it's by Brad Agnew and Kelly Agnew, and it came out about 2 weeks before I turned in my manuscript. And it's a very, very well-written, dense book about John Gill Lemmon's life. And it's called John Gill Lemmon, Andersonville Survivor and California Botanist. There is nothing about Sara, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to tell this story, because her story just grabbed me and she just wouldn't let go of me. I just felt as if somebody had to tell this story, and so far nobody else has. And Amy St. John has been wonderful about sending me some transcripts of Harold St. John's diary. She's the only member of the family that I've been in touch with. She has some cousins, but rather than complicate things by talking to several people, I've only communicated with her. And as far as I know, John Lemmon doesn't have any descendants that would know a lot about Sara.
So there's a question about, you mentioned that Sara taught art while she was also teaching PE. Do you have any formal art training?
I don't know that she had any formal art training, or at least I haven't found any evidence of it. She had, I don't know what that white thing is there that keeps appearing. I've found some records of, she did something called photochromatic painting, which was basically painting on mirrors and painting on glass. And she includes a formula for doing that. She doodled, and I have pictures of some of her very early schoolwork, and there's doodlings in the corner. So I think she was always interested in art, but I haven't seen any evidence of formal art training, except that when, after she was married to John, and Adelia Gates showed up, and Adelia Gates was a painter whose work is actually in the Smithsonian. And she really wanted to learn about botanical illustration. She didn't want to just be a decorative flower artist. So she showed up on their doorstep, and the three of them ended up forming a kind of team where they taught her the botany, and she helped Sara with some of her illustrations. And Adelia Gates had been trained by a woman named Emily Voga in Switzerland. And Emily came up with the idea, or is credited with the idea, of if you're going to paint a light colored flower, it's a lot easier to show it if you do it on a dark paper rather than trying to do a white flower on a white paper. And Adelia taught Sara that technique. And Sara used it a lot, as you could see in those pictures. And I think that's one of the reasons her work is so striking, is because of doing light colored flowers on dark colored paper.
Yeah. I'm going to have to sign off. I'm just so happy I was included in this, and thank you, Wynne. It was such an exciting project and talk, and I can't wait to see the book when it comes out. But I'm going to ask this one more question, and then I'm going to sign off because it's such a great question. How do you personally and professionally and perhaps mystically feel connected to Sara?
Ellen,
Bye-bye.
thank you for everything you've done on this, and we will get together for lunch or something after we've had vaccinations. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
You know, professionally, I think that maybe one reason that I feel so connected to Sara is because I've always been interested in intersections and the intersection between science and art and the old and the new and the East and the West. And I think that that's something that Sara and I share. As in terms of mystically, spiritually, I can't really explain why it is that she has grabbed me as hard as she did, but I think you have to have something like that to keep hanging in there for a 7-year project, because there's so many things. Life gets in the way, work gets in the way. I still do client work, and somehow you just kind of keep doing it. I don't know if I did a very good job of answering that or not.
Okay, I'll take over as the moderator here for a minute. We have one question about how did Sara and JG travel from California to Arizona? Was it by stagecoach or train, or do you know?
That's a really good question. They were able to get free train passes. So they traveled by train exclusively, almost exclusively, whenever there was a train. Even going all the way from California to New Orleans, they traveled by train. And so many, if you look at the plants that they describe, many of them are somewhere near a train route. One of the reasons they wanted to homestead at Salon was because at the time there was a rumor that the train was going to was going to expand to that area. It still hasn't. They did travel by stagecoach, if there was one, when they went from Tucson around the corner. I'm looking out at the mountain range, around the corner of the range, up toward Oracle. They did that by stagecoach. They hired drivers with wagons, because you can imagine the amount of stuff that they had between a tent and a stove and all of Sara's artwork. They had plant presses, and all their clothes and all their camping gear. So they usually hired a wagon. And so money was always an issue. Where were they going to get the money? And they, for a while, were funded by the Forest Commission and donations.
Okay, I think we'll do 2 or 3 more, and then we'll wrap it up. I'm seeing one. I don't think you answered this yet, Wynne. How do you personally and professionally and perhaps mystically feel connected to Sara?
That one, I think I did just
Oh,
answer.
you did do that one. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm still.
That's okay.
All right, sorry. Are there any surviving paintings that are not related to botany from Sara?
That's a good question. There are some that are in among those 276 paintings at the archives. There's a really lovely one of a basket, and it's not signed, and I have no way of knowing whether or not Sara did it, or whether maybe she had a student who did it, or maybe it's one of Adelia Gates. And there's another one that I've seen in a picture of on their wall, of an Indian woman weaving. And again, that one, I don't know if it's by Sara or if it's one that she just admired.
Okay.
So many questions and so many mysteries about her.
Yeah. Here's another one pertaining to the mystery. Was there any investigation to how their tent was set on fire? Do we know if it was accidental or intentional?
She did write about that, and there's a possibility that somebody did it intentionally. she made the mistake of hiding their money in the tent. And so it may simply have been somebody was after the money and then burned the tent to get rid of the evidence. She did write that they were suspicious about who might have done it, but she never made it clear as to who that actually was.
Interesting. Okay, I think we'll wrap it up with this next one. This one is for you pertaining to, so the writing is completed except for editing. This woman is wondering, what is next for you after the book?
Something really short. I'm looking at haiku at the moment. Yeah. I'm not sure. At some point there'll be another story that probably grabs me. At the moment, I'm really interested in language, and so I've been working during the pandemic. I've been working on poems and sending them out. I got lucky last year and had 6 that were published, and I'm just kind of waiting to see what story jumps out at me.
Great, awesome. Well, I think with that last question, I think we'll wrap it up. So I want to thank you, Wynne, and everyone for such a great presentation, and all the attendees for taking their time out of their day to attend. I wanted to tell everyone about our next salon, which will be held on February 11th, and will feature Carolyn Neathammer and Gregory McNamee. And if you would like to register for that event, which is also free, you can find out more information on our website, which is again www.thepimalibraryfoundation.org. And with that, I think we'll conclude this evening's presentation. So thank you, Wynne. If you have anything else to say, we'll end with that.
Oh, no, I just want to thank everybody for being here. And, I was scrolling quickly through the chat box and the participants. I mean, there are people from every stage of my life. Thank you so much for everything that you all have done for me and for coming here today. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Helene, and to xorb.com who handled the tech support. And thank you, Deborah. And especially to you, Ellen, even though you're not here anymore. Thank you all. Stay safe, stay well.
Thank you. And we hope to see you next month at our next salon. So
I'll be there.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. All right. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
You too. Bye-bye.